Welcome, friends, back to another episode of Mind Games. I'm Garen Emig of Sellout Crowd. I host the show. I put it on with the hope that you join us. Appreciate you doing so every week. Appreciate you reading our content at selloutcrowd.com every week. Before we meet our special guest of Mind Games this week, I want to thank our sponsors to the program. MidFirst Bank is on board once again. Two Fellas Movers, the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, Next Gen Roofing, FireLakeJobs.com, 988, Oklahoma's mental health lifeline, and our friends at Oklahoma Ford Dealers. Drive into your best in Oklahoma Ford Dealers today for the best deals on Ford's full lineup of trucks and SUVs. Ford is the best in Oklahoma. So my guest this week on Mind Games is an old friend of mine and an old friend of those who follow the Oklahoma Sooners. I'll bet they remember David Ubben from his time at the Oklahoman, chasing around Bob Stoops some, Jeff Capel some, if I remember right. Blast from the past.
It's quite a season. My bad. I think so that season, the very first game I covered as a professional journalist actually making money was the BYU-Oklahoma game. And then Oklahoma State also, I think, lost their opener that year. And then the basketball team flopped. And I remember at some point, Barry pulling me aside and going, before you got here, they used to play some pretty good ball around here. I don't know what happened.
So it's you. It was me that sent the OU program sideways in 2009. Yeah. Dave with the Athletic now does a lot of bigger stories than profiles of Tiny Gowan or Tommy Mason Griffin or Willie Warren and that crowd. As interesting as they were.
That was quite a team. Team.
My goodness. Yeah, Jeff, I one of these days I want to have a beer with Jeff Capel and ask him for what used to be off the record, on the record of what that was like, putting up with that bunch. But anyway, we brought him on here. We might reminisce before we're done with him about the Sooners, and we do want to talk a little bit perhaps about OU's bowl season, playoff, and all that stuff. But David, like I said, when I say he's on to bigger things, more serious things than OU sports, I mean it. He was in the eye of the storm, in a sense, in Las Vegas this week, where all sorts of stuff was flying around, partially caused by you, sir, in a case of a column you wrote for The Athletic about chaos that is not just over the playoff committee's decision to leave out Florida State, right? Mm-hmm. That got some attention, I hear. And then you have Charlie Baker, the president of the NCAA, outlining a revolutionary, is that too strong? Revolutionary proposal on
it's complicated. We can get into it, yeah.
Yeah, so it was, and we haven't gotten into it on Mind Games, or I don't think across the network. So It's good that you're here with us for a lot of reasons. Let's do this first. Let's get into Charlie Baker and what he's doing.
Sure.
For those who don't know, we have an outline. I think it's the best way to put it is some kind of an outline or a framework proposed by Charlie Baker, the new president of the NCAA, where member schools can opt in, and if I've got term wrong here, Dave, tell me.
That's right.
Opt into a subdivision of their league or FBS where they you put a minimum of $30,000.
A minimum of $30,000 per year. Per athlete for at least half of your scholarship athletes. So depending on that varies a lot. One of the things I was talking to some administrators about is if you're talking about the SEC or the Big 12 and you look at the Pac-12, the Pac-12 has a ton more sports. They have a ton more athletes. So that might mean $10 million, $12 million a year for UCLA, and it might mean $7 million a year for Texas or Oklahoma or whoever. It just going to sort of depend. But anyway, so yeah, $30,000 a year minimum, which I think the simplest way to think about it is it's a lot like coaching salaries, quite frankly. Not everybody pays $9 million, but you can. There's no rules against it. And if you have enough budget to pay, all your athletes $1 million a piece, in theory you could. And so that will be a competitive element. Some head coaches make $1.5 million a year. Some make $5 million. Some make $9 million. And so the idea is that you can do more for your athletes, but then you sort of get in the details and it gets a little hairy, and this is such in its infancy. I think the simplest way to put it, as far as Charlie Baker's letter and what it actually means, is it's like the egg was sort of fertilized. But there's a lot of things that have to happen between now and then. To say it's in its infancy is almost to say that's too mature. This is an idea, right?
Okay.
And this is the NCAA's president softening on the idea of paying players directly from the school, which in itself is a revolutionary idea. Yeah. This is just a letter from the president recommending this is what we should do. So getting there and dealing with the details is really, really complicated. So it's a mammoth shift in that you have the NCAA president saying, I think we should move to a model where the schools are cutting checks to players, but there's still no profit sharing. There's still no collective bargaining. Mm-hmm. The NIL piece is interesting because schools can enter into that directly, which would bring a lot of your NIL operations underneath your university umbrella.
Right.
I was talking to people on Tuesday. Bad day to run a collective.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yes.
And the NIL point was the next jumping off spot. Is that part of the verbiage of this is schools take more. It's schools doing their own NIL, facilitating NIL deals, not outside party collective.
I think the machinations would be the same. I think that schools can. This is a competitive sport, so schools can clutch their pearls at NIL becoming de facto pay for play, which is sort of what's happened. But at the very least, I don't think this changes that. It just brings it under the roof. So you can say we're only doing quote unquote real NIL, commercials, all that stuff. But it's still going to influence recruiting. It's still going to influence how much talent you have on your team, your ability to retain talent, your ability to attract new talent. So I don't think that it will change a whole lot about the infrastructure around the influence that NIL has if NIL goes in-house. You can not play the game, and then you're going to lose a lot of the games.
Mm-hmm. Baker's term for the pot is a trust fund? Is that right?
It wasn't really clear. Like, if you get, I don't think he explicitly said it pays out after graduation, but I believe that's the case because I was talking to some financial people in Vegas, and one of them brought up the point of like, okay, well, if we're going to get into the details on this, so let's say that you spend 2 years at a school, and so you've accrued $60,000, but then you transfer. You're not on the field. It's not working out for you. You transfer down to a school that has not opted into that subdivision to play. Well, do you still get that $60,000? Does it disappear? What happens to that? These are all things we don't have answers to because it's so early. It's interesting. It is somewhat revolutionary in that someone like this is saying that because we just have not seen that. But it's also nothing and not nothing. So it's very – I think the word that I heard a lot from athletic directors I talked to was, well, it's something and conversation starter, I think, are the two things that came up the most.
Mm-hmm. Caps on rosters, caps on scholarships. Also,
you can debate. You can. That's up for the basically. So the schools already have autonomy. The Power Five is basically the Autonomy Five. But if you opt into the subdivision, then that would give them the luxury to create their own rules around that. Because this has been a complaint for a long time before any of these changes. Is what does Alabama football have to do with Hampton softball? What does Texas basketball have to do with, North Carolina women's lacrosse? These are totally different, just situations. They don't have anything in common. And the NCAA is, 360 some schools with a bunch of different sports, some that make money, some that don't. And so the idea is that you get more like-minded institutions that are working for the same types of things and have the same interests and same just more commonalities being able to, because if you're trying to pass rules, well, the big schools are outnumbered, and so there's a lot of stuff that the big schools would like to do that has been a really difficult time passing. And so that's the idea, that whether that is scholarship limits, roster sizes, anything, basically. You could make up whatever rules you want if the membership agrees to it, if you've opted into this higher subdivision.
I want to throw another thing that's come up when past discussions about compensation have reached a new level, and that is Olympic sports / Title IX, the endangerment, essentially. That's been sort of a reflex argument against, right? Is that what, we have to have football in-house because without football being in-house, we can't fund, to your point, Hampton softball or Big 12 or Big 10 crew or something like that. Is there an element of equality of Title IX here that either Charlie Baker has addressed or is sufficiently thought of based on what you know of this proposal?
So the direct payments from the schools would obviously have to be Title IX compliant. But I mean, I hit on this pretty frequently. Schools love to threaten to cancel sports when they talk about this. Well, we have to cancel sports to be Title IX. You don't have to. You can change your budget, but nobody wants to change their budget. And that doesn't necessarily mean cutting, your coaching salaries necessarily. But like coaching salary, if you want to look at where the money has gone as the money has exploded. This is why I've talked about college sports as an exploitive enterprise, because if you look at it, the amateur model made sense in 1990. The money wasn't quite this crazy. But now, as things have exploded and you have billion-dollar TV contracts and unpaid athletes, it doesn't make sense. The amateur model is broken because the money has gotten so outrageous. Well, where has that money gone? Coaching salaries and facilities. That's pretty much
right
where most of it goes. Your stadium has got to be state-of-the-art. Well, we want to use our team facilities as recruiting things. And we're a nonprofit, so we can't be building a war chest. If we make money, we've got to spend money. So that's why everybody says they're broke, because, well, if your expenses change, we already have these built-in. It's basically like if you were operating your household and it was against the rules for you to have more than $10,000 in the bank. Well, if somebody came up to you and said, hey, all your expenses are about to go up 50%.
Yeah.
Well, you'd freak out too.
Right.
But that also means you're going to have to make some changes in your house. And I think that is kind of where college sports is nobody wants to do that. And so the first thing is, well, we're going to have to move to a smaller house because we got to cut out all these people that we're paying for. Yeah. And, nobody's asking you. You could give up a few of your kids, send them off to the orphanage and do whatever you wanted to do, but you don't have to. You can cut other places too, but it might be painful. This is where we are in college sports.
Yeah.
The economics are so broken beyond belief that I could talk about this for hours.
Yeah, no, I hear you. That's for a series for sure. You've hinted at sort of the initial impact or the initial reception that this got while you were out in Las Vegas. How would you characterize that? I think Brett, you had a Yormark quote in your piece that was pretty positive. Brett Yormark, the Big 12 commissioner, I think he used the term. No, I do. I've got it right in front. Transformative moment. So sounds like he's pretty intrigued. I don't know.
Well, I think the one thing everybody can agree on is this is not sustainable, the current state.
Right.
I think Greg Sankey said, he's talking to Roy Kramer at he went to the College Football Hall of Fame, and he said, I think Roy was the commissioner of the SEC for 20 years. I think he ended up on Capitol Hill once or twice. He's like, I feel like I'm there once or twice a month. Everything you do right now, you are walking into litigation. And that makes things very difficult. Well, that's what happens when you have a business model that in a Congress that can't agree on anything, the one bipartisan issue is college sports, the economics are broken. The left basically sees it as, hey, you're breaking workers' rights. You're taking advantage of people. The right sees it as, well, this is a free market that you're not allowing to exist. That clearly there is a value for these people's services, and you are artificially limiting it. So you've got, I was talking to one AD who said, listen, you're talking about Roe v. Wade goes to the Supreme Court. It passes 5-4. This is a very contentious issue. We go to the Supreme Court, we lose 9-0. Things have to change. And so right now, the status quo is not an option. And that is what you've got to wrestle with. And so, this is why nobody is throwing a parade for Charlie Baker to say, oh, what a forward-thinking, guy that is finally changing the system. No. You've been bullied by the courts into where you are right now.
Right.
So that's where we're at, and they have to change. But what that change looks like is going to be a debate that is years in the making.
Yeah, Yormark used the term transformative in your piece. I also think you use a term proactive. I don't think that's it. I'm not sure that I'd use proactive.
Well, they're not being forced by a court to specifically change, but they know that they're one step away from that. So you've got to.
Calendar-wise, if we're thinking about this in terms of if this is sub-infancy, where's the next benchmark here, David? When's the next convention/committee meeting that this gets further discussion?
So the NCAA convention is right off the back of the national championship game, so it's in about a month. And this will obviously be a huge topic of discussion. But I think agreeing on some rules of engagement, because I think the one thing that you had a lot of athletic directors saying, when I talked to him was, I'm glad we're doing something, but we got some issues in the details. And nobody really wanted to go out on a limb and attach their name to specifically oh, we need to do this, we need to do this. Right?
Yeah.
And then from the smaller schools, there is a fear of further separation of the haves and have-nots. Well, so we go to the NCAA convention. There's going to be a lot of smaller schools, maybe schools are on that cusp, that are pushing for their own interests. And okay, well, if we're going to do this, what does that look like? And maybe we don't have an opt-in system ultimately. Maybe I don't really know. I think what Charlie Baker drew up is sort of makes sense in a lot of ways. I still think it's a half measure. I think one person I was talking to out there was saying, "Hey, this all sounds nice, but who is representing the players and saying, oh, we like this. We want to do this." Well, they're not. And this is specifically designed to avoid collective bargaining and to get around employee status. Nobody wants them to be employees. And they have talked themselves into this idea that athletes don't want to be employees. Well, I think a lot of those conversations start with a lot of scare tactics of well, you have to be taxed on this, you have to be taxed on that. And then I can't remember which commissioner it was on stage sort of talking about, well, so I can be fired now. And am I fired because of my athletic performance or my academic performance, which is maybe the biggest, red herring, whatever we want to call it, faulty argument in this whole debate of they can be taxed and they can be fired. Garen, if you made 3 times as much as you made today, your taxes would be higher. Did you know that?
I might figure it out at some point.
And so, you know what? And so I think, like most people, if they said, hey, I'm going to be making more money, and they said, well, but you're going to be taxed on it, I would say, you know what? I'm going to back off. I don't want that money. I don't want to deal with the taxes, right? It's insane. And then the firing aspect of it is, I don't know if you guys have been following what Deion Sanders has been doing, but what he did was more explicit than a lot of coaches. You can get fired now. These scholarships are year to year. And if you're not fired explicitly or formally, they will run you off. They will find ways to get you out of there. You can be fired now. There is no downsides to this. And I think that they talked themselves into that because, like I said, it goes back to the budgeting, analogy of they don't want them to be employees. And and coming up with this weird Jimmy rigged system of loopholes and exceptions. And I think it was Charlie Baker. He said, we don't want an antitrust exemption. We just want a little antitrust. He literally said that on the stage. So it's okay, that's not a thing. Antitrust exemptions are much like pregnancies, not to belabor the new life analogies, but you either have one or you don't.
Yeah.
There's no little antitrust exemptions. So this is all, I mean, again, I always come back to, anytime you're talking about the economics of college sports, what is the quote that if a man's salary depends on him not understanding something, it becomes very hard to get him to understand something? And that's where we are. If you don't want to operate like a normal business and pretend to be a nonprofit and want all these exceptions, when everyone else in the world that has any common sense, whether they're in Congress or a normal person who understands this, looks at you and says, that's a business. Here we are.
Yep. And to underscore the point that a $30,000 trust fund or schools taking over NIL compensation is going to all of a sudden solve this general problem. The churn continues, right? I think 7 different states filed suit today about the NCAA transfer waiver process.
I've lost count of how many
that's
suits
today.
about
Yeah,
how many things. Like
that's going down today, and elsewhere, the Alston firm, I believe, has filed another suit over the NCAA's draconian pay-for-play argument. So this is the legal onslaught continues, regardless of how transformative or even revolutionary this might seem. And that's probably to the fault of the last however many years of backward thinking.
And the main reason that they fear all that legislation is because they point to that Supreme Court Alston decision.
That's right.
They lost 9-0. They know they're going to lose. There's a pretty strong precedent, and that's why they're so aggressive about trying to avoid litigation, because they know if it comes down to it, they're going to lose.
Yeah. Well, before Chaz Baker got everyone's attention with regard to flipping the NCAA upside down, we were immersed in college football playoff controversy and the shame of Florida State and what was going on with what the committee did. And you used that to sort of segue into another point of contention with regard to just chaos. And that is in regard to just this collision between college football's postseason and offseason. I thought it was a brilliant column and really laid bare just what's going on here this month. That was the focus, is that you've actually, if it's possible to be sympathetic to college football coaches for their salaries and their
as close as it comes,
their ego, this might do it. The way you articulated literal chaos with regard to the calendar. Tell us what got the reason behind writing it, and tell us the reaction to it.
I think it's just seeing. I mean, the portal opens up on Monday, or opened up on Monday, I should say. And I think you just look around and you see like there's so many things going on, and it doesn't really make sense. So college football, I mean, this goes back to the conversation we're having before, is that college football can't put limits on any of this, because if you put a limit on anything or you push back, you're going to be in court because you're limiting a kid's compensation. If you say, well, you're preventing me from playing for a year, well, then I can't earn money. You're limiting my NIL. Point to Alston. Ball game over. So because they were holding on so long to the old system, which was never going to work, they have accidentally legislated themselves into a situation where, as I laid out, Friday, you had the contact period open up for recruits, so you can recruit. Saturday, you have conference championship games happen. Sunday, you find out where you're playing for your bowl game. Monday, the portal opens. And so what is happening is you're recruiting your own roster, making sure you keep guys out of the portal. You're scouting the portal. You're hosting portal visits. You're recruiting your high school class, and you're finishing that up, making sure you don't lose any of those commitments. And then some schools are hiring coaches. There's still some jobs that are open. A lot of those jobs now with the portal day opening, the coaching carousel calendar has moved up because you want to have your new coach in place by the time the portal opens. Oh, and next year, we'd be 2 days away from 12 teams in the playoff playing for their life. I mean, some of those teams would get buys. But the point is that these things are all going to be happening at once. And I think that the simplest way to put it is if you compare it to the NBA and the NFL calendar, those make sense. The season ends. Then you have, free agency, and it's sort of reversed, the NBA and NFL, but the season's over. And then the roster construction happens. That is not the case right now in college football. It doesn't make sense. And when you look at, well, what can we do? Well, you're extremely limited because you are still tied to higher education, which means you're tied to an academic calendar. Right. And the academic calendar ends, obviously, right before Christmas. And the new semester begins, in early January. So if you're going to transfer or you're going to enroll early, you got to leave and you got to find a new place pretty quick. And all this stuff has to happen at once, and I don't know how you fix it. I think I can't forget which AD was saying, well, what if we made December the retention period where you couldn't enter the portal, but you recruit your roster, you get those commitments and figure out who you got, and then maybe you guys say they're going in the portal, but you can't really talk to them yet. Then we know who all's going in, you kind of know what your roster looks like, and then January you can go do that. I mean, in theory you could do that, but a lot of these semesters begin like January 10th, so you want kids to make a decision in a week and move in a week. That's asking a lot.
Yeah, I saw some of the feedback to your column was, well, just go back to one signing day in February. But that doesn't, if 80% of your class, if not 90, is enrolling mid-year, they need to get that done now, not in February. And so,
and one of the ideas I talked to was saying, well, let's just get rid of this portal period. Well, you can't do that. For one, you can't push back for all the Alston reasons and all the lawsuit reasons.
Right.
You're limiting kids. And kids want to get on campus so that they can start their academic career and be there for spring football. And that's one thing that sort of complicates the calendar, too, is there's no analogous thing to spring football in the NFL and the NBA. Like Summer League is not really the same. And mini camps and rookie camps this is not really the same in the NFL. But kids want to do that. You can't get rid of the early portal period. And so it's messy. It's too many things happening at once. And like I said, I think that the simplest way to look at it is conducting your postseason and your offseason at the same time. It's a little bit easier when there's 4 teams that are preparing. When there's 12, that changes the arithmetic some, and especially if you're trying to hire a coach that's in that 12. You're going to have a G5 coach probably, well, the G5 will be in there every year. That guy's going to be a hot commodity every year. You might have a coach moving up. You might be firing a coach possibly and trying to keep that roster intact. The possibilities are endless for a just complicated, messy situation that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, well, if the academic calendar is what it is and it's you've got to adhere to it, I suppose then if you're looking at moving something and adjusting to make it a little less messy and chaotic, starting college football earlier, is that even, I mean,
that might help. That's the only thing that you can do because there's nothing stopping you. Like if you wanted to start playing games like before classes start, maybe when classes started and start camp in like mid-August or mid-January or mid-July maybe, I don't think that rules wise you would be specifically prevented from doing so. I think it would help it if you move into this new subdivision, or if you make players employees, you can have more control over their movement because you're paying them. Right now they're not employees, and what that gives you is zero control over where they go. And then when you have free transfers, if you are a first-time transfer or someone who has a degree, well, then you have basically free agency. And I don't think that all this is good for the sport as a whole. It's more good than bad for the players to have the movement that they need to have, but for the sport, it's not healthy when you have a ton of players that are key contributors leaving every single year, and it's sort of like you just sort of throw all these names in a hat, shake it around, and then throw it up in the air, and he goes here, and he goes here, and he goes here, and you got to learn all that again. Not great for the sport. Yeah.
Well, I just know where I land on again, sympathizing with coaches I'm not programmed to sympathize for or with, right? I mean, I dropped it on the Alamo press conference today where Brent Venables and Jed Fish were talking about retention and the calendar. And, Venables, who's bless his heart, he's still new at this, David. This is only his second year as head coach. And so it hasn't taken, 12, 15 years off his life yet. He termed it, it's like waking up on Christmas every day because he gets to see what's out there. If he's going to lose Dylan Gabriel to the portal like he did Monday and Danny Stutzman to the NFL like he might in the next 24 hours, well, that just means I get to open a new gift and see.
That's like if Christmas happened on the stock market crash every year. It's like my team's gonna get decimated, but I'm gonna get these new guys. Yeah. So
that's how Venables operates, and that's just who he is. Someone else is, gonna dip their head in, sulfuric acid in response, and I can't do this anymore, or he's just gonna retire like our friend Bob Stoops did. A few
Smartest
years ago.
man in college coaching. I gotta say, Garen, the worst take I ever had is after Bob retired. I said, I think a lot of guys are going to retire early. The money is so crazy, you don't need it, and there's more and more demands. We've seen it. I think that some of the changes definitely impacted some of the college basketball retirements that we've seen. Bob might be the only one. Bronco Mendenhall's back in the game.
I saw
Luke's
that.
Back in the game. Bob's like the only one who got in his 50s and retired. These coaches are like addicted to it, man. They can't do anything else. I just can't wrap my head around that. I think, Gus Malzahn is a good example of like he gets fired from Auburn, he gets $21.3 million. If somebody was paying me $21.3 million to not work,
well,
my dream one day is to be a fired football coach.
Well, that's where ego comes back in. I mean, they might be able to live with themselves for a few days on that kind of money. I mean, but after there's only so many, Mai Tais and Turks and Caicos that'll keep a coach's ego from saying, I know I can do this. I've done it. I know I can be this big a deal again. I just have to have the right situation. I guess for Bronco, it's New Mexico. I'd forgotten all about him until I saw that. Here's what I would say, Dave. I just saw Bob at the Burlsworth Award on Monday. Drake was up for it, his son, for the Sooners, and he still looks like a different guy, acts like a different guy. If he's sort of the poster guy for the phrase, 180 pounds of weight off your shoulder with one moment, and he just looks like a guy who doesn't have everyone's problems on his mind all the time, which is kind of what a head coach does at a place like Oklahoma. I would say if you're, say, Jimbo Fisher trying to decide what to do next, spend a couple of days with Bob Stoops, either playing golf in Ireland, right, or house shopping in the Gold Coast of Chicago, or pitching rock and roll tequila. I think there's a life to be had there that's both sane and profitable, that doesn't involve the stress of college football coaching. But I've never done it, so maybe that's just me.
It's funny, I was talking to some people. There is a sect of people, and they don't have a job opening because Neil Brown coached his butt off this year and got it done. But there's a sect of people who would love to bring Jimbo home if West Virginia has an opening. And I just can't wrap my head around getting $77 million and then signing up to be West Virginia's head coach. But there's going to be people that want it. We'll see.
Is there anything left to be said about the old chaos? And that was what was created by the committee on Sunday. Gosh, it feels like 3 weeks ago, at least. But how'd you put it in for the Athletic? Recruiting wins over actual wins? Alabama over Florida State?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think you have undermined your entire event, because the whole point of the playoff was people don't like split national championships. People don't like teams that deserve an opportunity to play for it not getting that opportunity. Auburn in 2004, TCU in 2010, 11. It's happened before. In the 14 playoff, we were supposed to avoid this. Well, I think ultimately, if Alabama had been left out, people would have understood. There'd be some people frustrated. Oh, it's silly to have a playoff without the SEC. That's true. You wouldn't have governors. You wouldn't have senators getting involved. You wouldn't have people questioning the integrity of the process, which I actually think is unfair to that level. But if Florida State beats Georgia, they're going to have people that vote them number one. They're going to have a claim to the national championship. I don't think you're going to have a full split national championship, but your whole event was to create an undisputed national champion. And now you've opened up a road where that is not going to be the case with 4 teams. That's insane. So, I'm not a tinfoil hat guy on these things, but I do think that it is important to remember, if we learned anything from this summer, is that college football, above all else, is one of America's favorite television shows. And the playoff committee is casting a television show. I don't think that they specifically think about it like that. I think they do a really good job. I don't think I have any questions about their ethics or any of those things. But I think the idea of we need to have really compelling semifinals between teams that we think can compete. But my whole thing is, it's just so unbelievably unfair to deal in hypotheticals and not in reality. I just keep coming back to it. The committee has never leaned on hypotheticals until now. And they pretty much said it. We didn't put Florida State in because we don't think that they can compete and win a national title. I think Heather Dinnich's story, they had somebody explicitly say that. That's not part of what your charge is. And so I don't disagree with that. I think the playoff's going to be awesome. I don't think Florida State can win the national championship either. But to deny them the ability to play for that is offensive to me as a college football fan. And I think it's truly un-American that if you win all your games, period, you play 2 SEC teams out of conference, you deal with these injuries, and I think it's crazy to hold it against a team that they were able to beat a top 15 team with their third string quarterback and say, well, that makes them less worthy. It's insane to me. But here we are.
I agree with everything you said. I'll be glued to the set like everyone else because I think we got the semifinals are going to be freaking
That's
great.
sort of the tough part about all this.
Yeah, no,
I want to see those semis a lot more. I don't really want to see Florida State in the playoff.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you're telling me that somehow Johnny Wilson, who's declared, is going to come back to school, and that Jordan Travis is going to meet Mr. Miyagi, right? And he's going to cure his leg. I don't either, David. I agree with you. But you can still, two things can be true. The second thing that can be true in this case is that Florida State got screwed. And the thing that I keep, what did Bill Hancock said at one point in the run up to the final selection, that it's not necessarily the four most deserving teams.
Best teams, not most deserving. Yeah.
And Dave, I watched when I watched Alabama and Gravedigger against Auburn, how many people are telling you the week before the selection that Alabama truly is one of the four best teams when they were dead and buried at Auburn, and not vintage Auburn, just Auburn.
6-6 or 7-5, whatever they finished that.
Texas started November by beating K-State in a game that really Chris Kleiman blew by going for a touchdown instead of a field goal to continue that game in Austin, and then turning around and beating TCU, this year's TCU, not last year's, by a field goal. Mm-hmm. That was November. That wasn't September. Now, again, I saw Texas pick apart Oklahoma State. I think they should be in the playoff. But you're being awfully loose with the term best team just based on when they're the best team. And that, that just should have been 12 teams so long ago, man. That's where I kept falling back to. Is I know that there's always going to be argument. It's 13 and 14 versus 12, I guess, beginning next year. But at least we know it's not going to keep 13-0 Florida State out beginning next year.
And I think one thing that people seem to be overlooking is that you had a true freshman making his first start in that game, and if you get into the playoff, you have a fourth-year junior that's going to be starting that game, Tate Rodemaker. Brock Glenn was not going to play in the playoff.
Right.
So there's too much talk about the Louisville game, personally. Like, that's not the Florida State team that's going to be in the playoff, but that Florida State team will not be in the playoff. So nobody asked me for the committee. I would have told them. I said, hey, because I wrote the column the Sunday after Jordan Travis got hurt. I said, do not make this the reason this team doesn't get in the playoff. And maybe they read it and disagreed. Maybe they just never read it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, having raised Cain again, you got a national champion in mind?
I mean, Alabama's a favorite, but I think I'd take Texas. I think Texas beats Michigan. Beats Washington. Michigan, Alabama's going to be really, really interesting. But I think Texas is good enough to compete with Alabama on the lines and Michigan on the lines, and more explosive and better skill position talent. I think they're the best team in this field.
Mm-hmm. How about Jim Harbaugh's act of defiance / whatever you want to call it, turning the neutral viewer into an Alabama fan against polling for Nick Saban. Right?
America's team, Garrett. We're talking about America's team here. I am of the mind that I have some questions about the Big Ten's defensive numbers. Because I think you look around the league, even the elite teams in the league, and people praise these games as defensive showdowns, and I'm like, where are these weapons and these stellar quarterbacks that these teams are? Because all I see is quarterbacks throwing the ball in the dirt on a 6-yard out. So I don't know. People point to, Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan. They have these unbelievable defenses. We'll see.
We'll see.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But if you look at who Michigan has played offensively, and you compare them to the three teams that are in the playoff, buddy, they're in a whole new different depth now. So we'll see. I'm excited to watch the games.
Yeah, I am too. I'll be curious to see, morbidly curious to see how Georgia and Florida State come out in the Orange Bowl, for that matter.
I kind of think Florida State's going to get smacked, but the thing that sucks for Florida State is if they win, first of all, they should declare themselves national championship, hoist a banner, hold a parade.
I don't think there's any question. Yeah.
Mail out flyers to the committee, whatever you got to do. But they're going to get hit with Georgia didn't care. So I don't care. If you win that game, Florida, do your thing. Or Florida State, do your thing. I don't care.
Just for the sake of our specific audience, David, do you have any wisdom to pass along regarding OU, Arizona in the Alamo, or Oklahoma State, Texas A&M in the Texas Bowl?
I talked to Jed Fish. I talked to Jed Fish for a little bit in Las Vegas, and I mean, he's been one of the surprise hires of the last few years. But that 1-2 punch, man, with Tetaroa McMillan and Jacob Cowing, is really special. And they stumbled into Noah Fafita. You know, they pulled Jaden DeLora from Washington State. He had some good moments last year and a half, but then he gets hurt, and Fafita rolls in there. I mean, sometimes you trip and fall, and you find a pretty special quarterback. And Noah Fafita, man, he is a baller. So that's a really good team offensively. Arizona, they don't do a lot of like super crazy creative things, but they're really good at what they do. So they're not going to be doing a lot of like groundbreaking schematic stuff, but they're in a really interesting spot. Yeah. And you said A&M, the other one,
OSU A&M. That
I mean,
A&M, do a lot for me, but
the vibes. We my podcast co-host and I, Ari Wasserman, have been talking about the bad vibes teams of the century. And if you look at this year's team, the UCLA team, USC, and A&M were like the trio of some of the worst vibes imaginable. And I don't even know who's still left to coach for A&M in this game. I have no idea. Bobby P's back in Arkansas. Jimbo's gone. Elijah Robinson's up in Syracuse. I don't know who's going to be coach. I mean, have they talked about this?
I think it's Elijah's game, but
so he's going to coach.
I think he's going to coach, but it's felt like half the roster went into the portal yesterday.
Yeah, they had a bunch of guys. They had like 4 starters. Yeah, I don't know who's going to coach. I don't know who's going to play. I mean, me personally, if I had gone in the portal and I'm an 8M player, I mean, I'm not going to play in that game, so I don't.
Yeah, right.
Which is at the Texas Bowl? Which bowl game is that?
Houston. Yeah, they're playing in Houston.
I mean, that doesn't really get people that excited.
No, not really. You know, what's interesting about Arizona, Dave, I spent the whole year thinking of the 4 Pac-12 schools moving to the Big 12. The headache was going to be Utah because of Whittingham and all that he's done with the Utes. I may have gotten that wrong. Maybe it's going to be Fish in Arizona.
Well, they'll have Rising back. They'll have Brant Keithy back, presumably. I think Keithy's coming back. And they're still going to be salty on defense. So I think a full strength Utah might be. But Arizona's peaking at the right time. They'll lose Jacob Cowing, but McMillan will be back. You know, we'll see. I think we haven't seen a lot of the sort of P5 to P5 moves. So I think that the learning curve will be different for them than it was for, you know, BYU or TCU or, you know, any of the schools that have moved up. But in the same breath, you know, the Pac-12 was the best conference in football this year. So it's, you know, you look at Colorado, you look at Utah, you look at them, it's like, this is going to be a step down for them in competition. So I'm excited to see kind of what that means and how much of an adjustment there is just in having to center yourself in a new league.
Okay. 2 questions to exit with, a little more light in tone, if you don't mind. Favorite Sooner to cover? I have to ask, and it can be Tiny or Tommy Mason Griffin.
Gerald McCoy, easy one.
Yeah, and that was just enjoy it was a conversation with him, wasn't it? Not so much an interview.
Yeah, he was
a
great.
A willingness.
Yeah, I mean he always had his time. He was thoughtful. He was funny. Unbelievable player. Super fun to watch. So yeah, I would say probably him. I didn't spend a ton of time around Eric Stryker, but I think he would probably be on the list. Yeah, probably those 2. I'm forgetting somebody, but
that's a good one.
Who would be yours, Garen?
I always tell people my favorite was always Taylor Griffin because we'd always ask him about his brother. And he was pretty good, right? It's not like he was, you know, the 12th guy who was getting mop up time against Coppin State. I mean, Taylor was a legitimate
key player on that team,
right. And it felt like, you know, 80% of the questions were about Blake, and he answered them all reasonably and happily, and was very mature about the whole process.
What's Taylor doing these days? He got drafted by the Globetrotters. I remember that.
Who, Taylor?
Yeah.
He was working with Blake for years. I don't think he is any longer. That's a great question. That deserves as much attention as what are Tiny Gowan and Tommy Mason.
That sounds like a good story for Sellout Crowd, Garen.
It might be a perfect post-football season Sellout Crowd story. All right, favorite Christmas gift, last one of David Ubben's life.
I have received in my life.
Yes. since it's the season.
Oh man, I gotta go Nintendo 64.
Okay.
When I was like 12. Listen, Garen, I don't know that you can truly appreciate the first time that you ever played Super Mario 64 in a 3D world. Like your head just explodes. You're like, what is this? I can walk in circles. I don't have to go just back and forth. It's so yes, the N64 probably. Shout out to Cruisin' USA also. Bringing the giant arcade game home to my living room was fantastic. So I'm gonna go Nintendo 64. I think I got that for Christmas when I was like 10 or 11.
That's such a great answer, and it's a lot better than mine, which would be the old electric football where you plugged it in and it sounded like a space heater, and the little plastic guys kept bouncing around and didn't really do anything.
Yeah, I've seen electric football. It sounds terrible to me. I don't get it.
No, it was. It was when you plugged it. It was great until you plugged it in and realized what's the point. Because it was just 22 little plastic guys just going their own direction. And the one with the ball could have been anywhere. He could have been in the kitchen by the time you unplugged it. But to paint the jerseys and the helmets on the players, and you have no idea in 1975 what a big deal that was for 8-year-old Jared. So I like yours is better, but I'll at least throw that out there. So
shout out to Nintendo. I still get after some. I've always been a sports video game person. So that, and the first time I played Madden 2001 on the PlayStation 2 were the two moments where I was like, I can't believe this is real. Here we are.
Shout out to David Ubben of The Athletic for coming on Mind Games this week. It's been fun to dig into his head, get his thoughts on topics that he understands a lot better than I do. Hopefully you now have a better understanding thanks to his help. We appreciate you tuning in. We know you have a choice when it comes to your podcast and written content. We at Sellout Crowd do our best to make it worth your while every week. Big thanks to Jacquelyn Musgrove, our producer, Michael Martin and Michael Lane for their efforts behind the scenes to make Mind Games and other Sellout Crowd podcasts possible. Until next week, please stay warm and happy.